Order, Senator. Order. Order, senators. Order, senators.
Moreover, Mr. Speaker.
Order, members. Senator Omondi shall be given a copy, just like everybody else. And order, senators, I don't think it is worth plenary time. It is not worth plenary time to interrupt another member just because you need a copy. Whether they start from your side, they will reach the other side. Whether they start from the other side, they will reach the other side. Just be patient a bit. Unless you see them withdraw from the building, from the chamber with copies, then you know they are finished. Proceed, Senator Professor Nyong'o.
Mr. Speaker, anybody who knows the ABC of science today will know that in any part of this country, given the level of technological development, in any part of this country, people can communicate easily through satellite, through VSAT. That is why I can sit in my home in Rata without a Wi-Fi, but a VSAT, and watch Liverpool playing Manchester in England with local natives. And the TV will not go off, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in any case, even if I take my phone here or my iPad and I rub something, there's a backup within the iPad or the phone. It will tell you, go to trash and retrieve what you trashed. So, Mr. Speaker, we have time, Mr. Speaker, from now until the election to deal with any technological problem without changing the law. What amazes me, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the law that has been changed and how it is what has been worded, what comes as an amendment is a poor workmanship than the original law. So, Mr. Speaker, why are we abandoning the original law for poor workmanship? Why are we afraid of this law, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I think this law fulfills exactly what Kriegler told us to do. Kriegler told us that if you want free and fair elections, ensure that the process and system of election is sacrosanct as much as possible. Ensure that you have consensus in developing these electoral laws. Mr. Speaker, we had consensus on this law. We had two senators from both sides, a committee of both the Senate and the National Assembly that produced this law. Why are we subjecting ourselves to some form of partisanship by proposing an amendment which is only proposed by one side? Why, Mr. Speaker? Why do we want to plunge this country into another era of uncertainty, another era of suspicion? Mr. Speaker, I was told yesterday, and I felt very sad, that one of the reasons why this law is being changed is that some lawyers went to the president and asked the president, Mr. President, the law as it exists today, do you think you can win an election with the law as it is today? That's why I'm telling you that we should not create uncertainty in society. If we stick to this, I'm just telling you what the uncertainty being created, which is not necessary. And then the president was told that if you want to win free and fair election, change this law, Mr. Speaker. We should avoid this kind of uncertainty, Mr. Speaker, by making sure that what we agreed together as a house, as two houses, we stick to it. Because, Mr. Speaker, if we continue to impose these laws on the people of Kenya, the uncertainty is going to continue, Mr. Speaker. And this is what I'm calling this house to avoid, Mr. Speaker. This uncertainty is not good for this country, Mr. Speaker.
Give Senator Mugo the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Can the Honorable Senator for Kisumu Rural substantiate, yes, and say who informed him that the president, can you let me, at least I have a right to speak, not just your side, I also have a right to speak. If he can substantiate.
Order, senators. I did not recognize Senator Mugo because of where she's sitting, which side. Yes. I recognize it because you rose on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, sir, that's a very strong statement from the senator, which puts the impression that the president is bringing this rule so he can win the election. Can he substantiate and tell this House what the source of the information, because those are lies. We should not tell lies in this house.
Senator Professor Nyong'o.
Mr. Speaker, please, if you understand me, I said let us stop these uncertainties, because these uncertainties lead to talks and rumors that create further fear in society. And I told you that I was told this, and I was alarmed that this kind of amendment should create such fear and uncertainty in society. It is not necessary. Let us stop the amendment so that we can avoid such uncertainties and fear in society. My friend,
Mr. Speaker, as I'm on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, just before we commenced the business of the House, you said explicitly, actually you stood up and you read communication that commenced this debate, communication from the National Assembly, saying, Mr. Speaker, that you have received the bill from the National Assembly. This bill did not come from the President. Actually, legislative work in this country belongs to Parliament, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, to create the impression wrongly, so that with the purpose or intent of misleading and whipping emotions, Mr. Speaker. And also, Mr. Speaker, this House does not rely on hearsay from outside. Mr. Speaker, there is no way the Senator for Kisumu can stand and tell this House that he had something somewhere, so that becomes an issue here, unless he can substantiate such a rule. And our standing orders, Mr. Speaker, against also introducing or discussing such a person as the President without moving a special motion, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, is he in order to try and mislead this country?
I think, Mr. Speaker, I'm being misunderstood. What I said was the following. I don't want to discuss the President. I just said that this kind of amendment creates uncertainty in society. And I was alarmed when somebody approached me on their own and told me, Mr. Senator, do you know why this thing is being amended? It's being amended because some lawyers have gone to the President and told him, if this law stays as it is, do you think you can win elections? That is what I was told. And I'm telling you that one of the things that this amendment is creating in this republic is creating the kind of fear and uncertainty that we wanted to avoid by having an electronic system of voting that will keep every Kenyan certain that the election will be free and fair. Oh, that's all I'm saying. And I'm with you. I'm with you, my friend on the other side. I'm completely with you. I would not like the character of the President to be discussed in that manner. I would like to have a law like this one on which we all have consensus on both sides of the House, so that when we go out there, the people of Kenya have confidence in both us and the law. Why should we decide, after you've done such a beautiful law, to sit somewhere and bring an amendment which is railroaded in the lower house, and you want to railroad here too? Mr. Speaker, this should not happen. I beg to oppose.
Orders, Senator Professor Nyong'o. You know, you have ended by railroading everywhere. When you know we have just, we have you even had the opportunity to finish your 80 minutes. That cannot be described in that kind of manner. Senator Wako.
Thank you, Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to speak on the report of the Joint Committee, Studying Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights and Information Technology. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think the report has been laid, and because I understand that I'm not moving a motion, but I'm speaking during the second reading of the bill that came from the House, I understand that I have a very limited time to introduce this report. But I crave your indulgence. If I exceed that time, kidogo hapo, let me just continue. Kidogo tu nimalize. Mr. Speaker, sir, As you are aware,
Order, Senator Wako, if you had used the first minute properly, I would give you the indulgence, but I will not now.
No, thank you. The honorable members will recall that on 28th December 2016, the Speaker of the Senate relayed a message from the Speaker of the National Assembly to the House regarding the passage of the Election Law Amendment number 3, National Assembly Bill number 63 of 2015. The bill was read the first time here on 28th December 2016, and the Speaker committed the bill to the Standing Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights for consideration and public participation. Further, during the debate that afternoon, the Speaker also decided that cognizance of the technological issues that may arise during the consideration of the bill, the Speaker ruled that the Standing Committee on Information and Technology should join the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I confirm that yours was a wise decision because we were really dealing with the technological issues. And therefore, I'm very pleased that both myself and my co-chair, Mtai Kagwe, who chairs the Standing Committee on IT, were able to marshal this thing. The Speaker, sir, I must acknowledge, give thanks to you, Mr. Speaker, sir. When you ruled that the special sitting will be on 4th of January, I pleaded on behalf of both committees to you that we shall not have time, particularly taking into account that 2nd of January was a public holiday and the sitting to seek views from the public had been advertised for 3rd of January. So there was no way we could sit on 3rd of January and report to the House on 4th of January. And I'm glad, Mr. Speaker, sir, that you agreed to give us at least 1 day. That 1 day, Mr. Speaker, sir, has been useful. I want also to take this opportunity to thank the clerk and his officers who supported us in our deliberations. Because of the constraints of time, we had to meet up to very late hours at night to ensure that we had all the views. I believe there was no night in which we did not adjourn before 8:30 p.m. And I can tell you for sure that last night we did not sleep until today to ensure that this report is with you. And maybe in the future, consideration should be given to giving more time to the committees to delve into these very, very important issues, but which are of national importance, particularly where the public is concerned. There was, Mr. Speaker, sir, an overwhelming response from the members of the public. And all of them made written submissions, very well argued, and those written submissions are in the volume that I have attached to the report, so that members can read for themselves what the overwhelming members of the public stated. The overwhelming members of the religious community, the trade unions, not forgetting the official officers such as the Cabinet Secretary in charge of information technology, such as my worthy successor, Professor Gidu Muigai, is all there, Mr. Speaker, sir. And if you read that, you'll find that the overwhelming majority of the people in this country wanted a particular line of action to be taken. But I'll be coming to that later, Mr. Speaker, sir. If you look, because public participation is a very, very important thing, and I'm glad that pursuant to our request, that we have a public participation, you readily agreed. We know that there may have been attempts to ensure that we finish on 28th of the whole debate, just like in the National Assembly on the same day. But the decision that this House took, that public participation must take place, that public participation is a cardinal principle of our Constitution, I think that decision was wise. And the people responded very well. The list of those who appeared before the stakeholders, Mr. Speaker, sir, is at pages 9 to 10. And you'll see there, Mr. Speaker, sir, they include the Ministry of Information, Communication, Technology, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries, IEBC, the Communications Authority of Kenya, the Interreligious Council of Kenya, the Law Society of Kenya, the Attorney General, as I already mentioned, the political parties, KANU, CORD, and Jubilee made extensive submissions to us. And I emphasize that because when we are talking about elections, it's also a political process. And it's very, very important that when we are discussing election laws and regulations, or even when the Independent Electoral Commission is discharging its constitutional mandate, that it should be done through an intensive consultative process with the people of Kenya, but in particular with the political parties which are there, whose position is there, provided for and enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya. We also had quite the Computer Society of Kenya, quite many, all totaling. The Kenya National Chamber of Commerce is there. What's important also, we had the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which is a commission which is there under the Constitution. And as a committee, of course, and as chairman, I took very seriously the views of that commission, which is entrusted by the Constitution to oversee laws and regulations in this whole area, including the right for election, the right to stand as a voter, the right to vote, the right to stand as a voter, to stand for any elective political positions. So I took their views, we took our views quite seriously, Mr. Speaker, sir. So our position was at the beginning that we adopt a bipartisan approach. And I can assure you that the discussions within the committees were very robust, they were very frank, all points of view were taken on board. We did not curtail any debate in the course of the discussions. But as is in the nature of any democratic process, you cannot discuss issues ad infinitum, and that you must, at the end of the day, cast the vote. And therefore this report that I'm presenting to the House today, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because at least the co-chair has tried a bit to try to hammer out an agreement which we thought addressed the mischief which many people made submissions. The mischief which they said was a mischief of these clauses. And we wanted, and the co-chair will be speaking, we wanted to see, if possible, to achieve a consensus which addresses that mischief. But unfortunately, we were not able to hammer an agreement. And therefore, it had to come to voting. And in voting, 10 members voted for the amendment as there, and 6 members voted against the amendment, and those 6 members decided to append the minority report, which is attached to this report. According to the standing orders, the minority have a right, or in fact any member has a right to attach his views to the report which has been adopted by the committee. So the committee adopted this report through a vote of 10 against 6. I think that should be. And unfortunately, I can also say that the voting was along party lines. I would have preferred the voting to have been along ideas, concepts, and whatnot, so that some are voting for one side, the ODM is voting for one side, some the Jubilee are voting on the other side, so that we come up code which includes Ford Kenya, code which includes Wiper, code which includes ODM. I would have liked it. In other words, I would have liked the vote to have taken place, but in a mix, more focused on the pros and cons of the ideas that had been meted out. But that was not to be. It was along the party lines. Mr. Speaker, sir, we addressed each and every proposed sub-amendment. Went clause by clause. We were briefed by the legal counsel who had gone through this report.
What is this, Senator Kimani?
Mr. Speaker, just probably to, as the chair of that committee, the co-chair, presents his report, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I think we'll need your direction on that, because, Mr. Speaker, the chair says that they have prepared a report, and which he is tabling before this House, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, he has proceeded also to say that the committee undertook a vote on this particular
order. Why
report,
don't you
Mr.
raise
Speaker.
a point of order before you justify it?
Mr. Speaker, my point of order is the senator, the co-chair, in order, Mr. Speaker, to then bring this report and table it to the House, Mr. Speaker, when the result and the purpose of having a committee, Mr. Speaker, with an odd number all the time is for the committee to arrive at a decision and take a position and table a report that has got the outcome. And Mr. Speaker, these committees, Mr. Speaker, are guided by the rule of majority.
Order,
Mr. Speaker.
Order, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, is it in order? Is it in order for the committee to table two reports at the same time? One appended to the other, Mr. Speaker, because the committee can only table a report, Mr. Speaker. That says that this is the position of the committee, Mr. Speaker.
Order, Senator Kimani wa Matangi. Order, Senator Hassan Omar Hassan. Just because you don't like what your fellow senator is saying is no justification for you to speak out of turn. This is House of Rules. Senator Mosoko at the floor. Senator Kimani Wamatangi sought to come on a point of order. This is the easier one to deal with. That's not a point of order. It is not informed by facts. It's not based on any standing order. And so proceed, Senator Mosoko. Order members, I will only entertain points of order that are valid.
Yeah. I thank you for that ruling. In fact, the committee followed.
Them with the contempt they deserve.
In fact, the committee followed the standing orders, and the decision of the committee is by a majority.
Order members, this is debating time.
Yeah. So I don't see what.
Senator Amos Wako, you wanted more time and you are busy wasting time. I've already dismissed that point of order.
Thank you. Don't be jittery, Mr. Kimani. The chapter 2. I refer the members to chapter 2. Chapter 2, which deals with public participation. I really want members, I cannot go through it properly, but I really want members to read chapter 2. Because we came into this to facilitate public participation. I want dear members And we have tried as much as possible on each and every issue in the bill. We have tried in this chapter to say what the public said. Who said this, who said that, who made this proposal on each and every amendment that was part of the act which was referred to us. Mr. Speaker, you will see in page 11, we have the use of biometrics in the identification of voters, and we have stated there the views of the independent...
Senator Wako, just to guide you,
yeah.
You have less than 5 minutes to go.
No. Okay. So let me advise you, since I have less than 5 minutes, to read that report. It will inform you on where the views lay on each and every issue that came under that. But now that I have only 5 minutes, maybe I'll go to one of the amendments which really related to the new clause 44A, which is the most contentious one. You'll see again the views herein and therein properly expressed. Some, of course, were of the view that Section 44 is irrelevant because it's already provided for under the existing laws. The Chief Secretary in charge of IT actually criticized the procurement process of the IEBC by saying that the IEBC, by going into the procurement process, which closes on 9th of January, only on the integrated system, they jumped the gun, and his main criticism there was that that procurement process did not include a backup. But the Independent Electoral Commission itself said that actually, if you carefully read that procurement process, it does include a backup. So according to the authority of the Independent Electoral Commission, it is possible to have a backup which is supported electronically. The feeling was it's not there, and because it's not there, we must have manual. But it is possible to have an electronic process, a backup process which is supported electronically. But there are others who say that, okay, even if you have that, that can also fail. And therefore, there is room for manual whatever, for the manual backup system. But even the Attorney General and everybody else emphasized that that manual system should not be the one which is so open that it replaces the main system which is electronic. In other words, the manual system must be such that it is the exceptional rather than the norm. That manual system should not be used as a backdoor to replace the electronic system. And some said that
your time is up.
So read very carefully, but at the end of the day, as I said, the majority decision went, and in accordance with standing orders, we have also attached a minority report, which I hope you can also read before you can make a final determination on this matter. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Kimani Wamatangi.
I can speak from here. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, actually, as I just want to clarify as I go into the issues I wanted to raise, Mr. Speaker, that my substantive issue that I wanted to settle with the chair of the committee was whether he was tabling one report or two reports, because Mr. Speaker, that's important for to be clear to this House, Mr. Speaker, that he indeed has tabled one report which Mr. Speaker, he has said clearly that it is the majority. And, Mr. Speaker, let me first begin by lauding the committee because they have done the work that this House gave them, Mr. Speaker, the work of hearing the members of the public and the issues that members of public had, Mr. Speaker. And I also want to congratulate the committee because of keeping time, Mr. Speaker, we had clearly given them a timeline which they have met, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to go straight to the issues that I think really have caused so much of the friction, apparent friction, Mr. Speaker, that in my view is not necessarily justified, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by listening largely to most of the debate that has prevailed, Mr. Speaker, the amendments that were brought to this House, Mr. Speaker, they center around the issue that the co-chair of this committee has finalized with Mr. Speaker, and that is the amendment that seeks, Mr. Speaker, to introduce, Mr. Speaker, a complementary system, Mr. Speaker. And I want, in my contribution to this motion, Mr. Speaker, to really first read out, because I think this is where the mischief is. And, Mr. Speaker, I also want to be on record that I believe most of the temperatures that have been raised politically in this country because of the debate that has been held, Mr. Speaker, has been unnecessary. Mr. Speaker, it has just been as a result, probably, Mr. Speaker, of some people wanting to seek largely political attention because the matters are as straightforward as can be and has been said by the chair, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the contentious Section 44A as amended, Mr. Speaker, is so clear in its language. It says, Mr. Speaker, it says that notwithstanding the provisions of that Section 39 and Section 44, the Commission shall put in place a complementary mechanism for identification. Mr. Speaker, it says that there will be a complementary mechanism.
Proceed, Senator Kimani.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The point I want to make is very simple, Mr. Speaker, and that is why it may be in the interest of some of my colleagues to disrupt it by speaking in between so that it is not heard, but it will be heard, Mr. Speaker, because it says that the complementary mechanism is for identification, Mr. Speaker, identification of voters, not a complementary system for voting. It is for identification of voters. And it goes further to say, Mr. Speaker, that it also is a complementary system for transmission of already results which have been attained through voting, Mr. Speaker. And this is, Mr. Speaker, where the mischief lies. Because this bill as it is in itself, if we had taken time, or if members who are opposed to it had taken time to look at the other provisions, would find that really there are no issues. Mr. Speaker, in Section 4, Mr. Speaker, in Section 4 of this particular bill, it says, Mr. Speaker, in Section 4.2.
Mr. Speaker, would have been in order to request Senator Matangi to explain to the House what the significance of the word notwithstanding is in this particular amendment. Because the word notwithstanding negates the original legislation.
Order, members, that's not a point of order. That's a point of argument and seeking knowledge. And I think that's the business of the members.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in payback also to my good friend, Senator Anyang' Nyong'o, I also wish to ignore that point of order as it is, Mr. Speaker, in consequence. But I wanted to make a very simple point, Mr. Speaker. That can be followed by anybody, Mr. Speaker. Even a child in class, Mr. Speaker, can follow what this particular law says. But Mr. Speaker, in Section 4, Mr. Speaker, 4.2, it says that the commission shall within 90
What
days
is it,
of the
Senator
date.
Orengo?
I don't want really to interfere with the contribution from Senator Matangi, but for him not to be seen to be casting aspersions to our intelligence and capacity for understanding the English language, could he probably look at the report and find out what the President of the Law Society of Kenya said, that the word complementary, reading all the dictionaries in the world, and the word notwithstanding, that the wordings which are causing considerable difficulty is not a simple matter as he's putting it. But if he can explain, then probably we'll get persuaded. But those particular words are in the report, and the Law Society itself is saying those words are very complicated in terms of the law which you are trying to put forward.
Order members, Senator Matangi, you can also disregard that particular order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. And
for the simple reason, that's really a point of argument.
Yes, Mr.
Senator Kimano Matangi has not pretended by any shade of any stretch of imagination that is an authority on such matters. Proceed, Senator Matangi.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. And
his contribution in the best way he understands it.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have with me, Mr. Speaker, I have with me from the most available Google on the interpretation in English language of what the word complementary means. It is here, Mr. Speaker. You can Google. Simple. It means a favorable alternative, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, the point I want to drive home is this, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding this argument that has been brought, Mr. Speaker, because Mr. Speaker, the gist of the argument from those that oppose or that had an opposing view to that report, Mr. Speaker, and largely from the other side of this House, is that, Mr. Speaker, that complementary mechanism, as they have said, may give rise to voting by non-existent or dead voters, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, look at what clause 4 here says. It says that the Commission shall within 90 days from the date of the notice of a general election open the register of voters for inspection for a period of 30 days or such a period as the Commission may find fit, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, if Mr. Speaker, there is a genuine fear that at any one time, during using a complementary system, that any voter who is not supposed to vote would be voting, Mr. Speaker, the logical question to ask would be, because it is provided for in the same bill, Mr. Speaker, in the same act, that voters' register will be open for scrutiny 90 days before the election occurs, Mr. Speaker. What would stop a concerned Kenyan from going and scrutinizing that same register, Mr. Speaker, which is available, and saying that these particular voters who are here do not exist, Mr. Speaker, even before that voting has commenced? So, Mr. Speaker, so the argument that there is any possibility that a system can be used, Mr. Speaker, to vote out people who are not in the register is not valid, Mr. Speaker. It can be discounted by the provision of the same act, Mr. Speaker. And there are mechanisms in this country, Mr. Speaker, if before the election occurs, one finds that they have a genuine complaint, they can lodge that complaint with IEBC, Mr. Speaker, before the election, and say we have scrutinized as per the provision of the act that this register is not up to date, or there are people, Mr. Speaker, in that particular register who should not be voting, Mr. Speaker. So if we allow, Mr. Speaker, the misdirection that the country should be convinced that there is a possibility, notwithstanding again the provisions of that section 4, that there can be that mischief, Mr. Speaker, it is wrong. Now, secondly, Mr. Speaker, this country knows very clearly the journey we have walked since 2007 and 2008, Mr. Speaker. And it will be wrong, Mr. Speaker, for any of us as sitting members of parliament to try and create a scenario, Mr. Speaker, that will take us back to where we were, Mr. Speaker, from those years. And not only inaction, Mr. Speaker, but even trying to foment a scenario that would lead this country back to those dark days, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, it behoves all of us to be sincere, Mr. Speaker. The amendment contained in this particular act, Mr. Speaker, do not amount at all to a scenario that would bring the kind of disaster or the kind of disenfranchisement that is envisaged or as is portrayed, Mr. Speaker, by those that are opposing this particular amendment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me just speak a quick word on the provision here that the amendment here that has been brought forward on the qualifications, Mr. Speaker, of members of parliament. Mr. Speaker, as I agree largely that there has to be a threshold, Mr. Speaker, that requires that members of parliament should have qualifications even as high as a degree, Mr. Speaker, which is okay. But, Mr. Speaker, when advertising for any position that requires qualifications, for example, in any profession, it is required when you call for one with a degree, you specify which kind of degree you want, Mr. Speaker. You cannot say that you're advertising for a job for a judge and you say people to come and apply for jobs as judges with any degree. You say that that particular person must possess a degree in law. Mr. Speaker, if you are calling for people with qualifications and Mr. Speaker, for qualifications with a degree to become medical doctors, Mr. Speaker, you will specify and say, let us have applications for people who have gone to medical school and have got degrees in medicine, Mr. Speaker. So as we move ahead and correct this, Parliament also requires, because the generalization of this requirement also suggests that it is not placed anywhere based on a particular interest, Mr. Speaker. Reason I say that, Mr. Speaker, is because in this House and in other houses, we have got medical doctors, we have veterinary doctors, we have geologists, we have all manner of qualifications, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, the value that this attributes by having that qualification, Mr. Speaker, can only be specified so that it becomes relevant in law, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to summarize by saying that this country is watching the actions that will be taken by this House this afternoon and on the way forward, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, because we all have political interests, Mr. Speaker, let it not be that the political interests of a few of us can be, Mr. Speaker, put in a position so that the peace, Mr. Speaker, so that the safety and security of our citizens is compromised so that we can pursue a political agenda. This matter must be settled, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I said that, and Senator Halwale is gladly, Mr. Speaker, thumping up for me on that contribution. It is precisely that what I am addressing from your side, so that the CORD coalition can realize that this country is greater than any ambition that any one of you may hold now and in future. And so that when you propose any amendments to this law, they must be based on fact, they must also be based on law, they must be based on the simple premise that there are many more Kenyans out there who stand to suffer. And the interest that either Senator Halwale may want to become a deputy vice president in the so-called big arrangement of NASA, Mr. Speaker, which is an non-existent outfit, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, which is an outfit, Mr. Speaker, which has been premeditated on positions which do not exist in this country, Mr. Speaker. But all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is this, that the politics of the day must not be used to determine the future of people who do not sit in this House, so that we can satisfy a few, Mr. Speaker, who...
Your time is up, Senator. Senator Mutai Kagwe, co-chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, I want also to pass my salutations to the Speaker himself, the team, as well as my co-chair, Senator Amos Wako. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, I want to say that we have listened to the public, because that is one of the reasons why we started this process. We have listened to many people, both for and against. We have listened to institutions and we have listened to individuals. Mr. Speaker, the one thing that was clear is that the spirit of the Senate, the maturity of the Senate, was maintained throughout the entire discussion, even when we debated both in the Senate and at Windsor. It was very clear that the maturity of this House was maintained at all times. And my hope and prayer is that even today, as we agree or disagree, or agree to disagree, we will still maintain the dignity of this House. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that there seems to be some confusion regarding the arguments that are being put forth across the floor. The first statement I would like to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. There wasn't, to my mind, in the presentations that were made by the public, and indeed even the presentations that are being made from the Jubilee side, I have not heard a single person say that we want to move from an electronic system to a manual system. Not a single person. Not a single person. Mr. Speaker, let us make it clear that the intention that we have is not to revert from an electronic system of managing our voters to a manual system of managing our voters. But Mr. Speaker, if you go into an aircraft, if you enter an aircraft, they will tell you that in spite of how efficient an aircraft is, underneath your seat is a lifesaver. Mr. Speaker, sir, if you go into a matatu, you will find underneath the matatu is a spare wheel. The intention, Mr. Speaker, is not that those manning aircrafts or the pilot who has announced that you are going to, that a seatbelt is under, a life jacket is under your seat. They have no intention of using it at all. At all. So the idea, Mr. Speaker, is not to go and use the lifesaver. The idea is that you need a backup in the event of a problem. Mr. Speaker, the reason why there would be a spare wheel in any matatu.
Nidhamu yangu, Bwana Spika, nisingependa kumkatizia mwenyekiti wangu, lakini katika hii report, Bwana Spika, kuna mahali panaposema manual complementary system. Kwa hivyo ni makosa mwenyekiti akisema kwamba hakuna mahali kumezungumzwa manual system.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have got, Mr. Speaker, as you know, I have tremendous respect for my brother from Kwale, who is a member of the ICT committee, and therefore I would have expected better. But Mr. Speaker, my brother from Kwale is actually misleading, because, and he has read his own conviction. Mr. Speaker, he has said very clearly that the word you have used is complementary system. Mr. Speaker, let me say this. There is a narrative out there, and this is what...
Order, Senator. You're either responding to him or you're making your own contribution.
Mr. Speaker, I've already responded to him.
These words were manual complementary.
Mr. Speaker, what we have said very clearly is this. First, there is no reverting from an electronic system to a manual system. The system that we intend to use and the proposed system is an electronic system. I had gone on to try and explain, Mr. Speaker, that the reason why...
What is this, Senator Ongoro?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect, we are now making reference to a document which all of us have. And is it in order for the chair of ICT to keep misleading this House and the nation that there is a specific complementary system that they are making reference to, when the report that I have here on page 12, if you read 47, it actually, under that subtitle of use of complementary mechanism, when you read that, it simply says to introduce a complementary mechanism for identification of voters and transmission of election results that is simple, accurate, verifiable, secure, accountable. It does not actually state, as he is stating here and now, that it is an electronic. He is misleading the House.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Order members. Again, I want to appeal. And was it Senator Orengo who put it? Don't insult the intelligence of members.
Yeah.
And I'll treat it as gross misorder. Anybody who is deliberately misleading others while trying to purport to be correcting another one who was misleading, and that member had not misled anybody. Proceed, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the protection, because in the amendment, if you look at the amendment, it does not refer anywhere. But, Mr. Speaker, it is possible that electronic systems, even if you do 2 electronic systems, can fail at some point. And, Mr. Speaker, let me say this. We have been given examples. We have been given examples of countries that have got an electronic voting system. What we have in Kenya, in reality, even as we speak, is not a full electronic system, because the counting of our votes is not electronic. It is a manual system. That is how we count. In the United States, where they have got a complete electronic system, I could read for you a litany of failures of the electronic system. In fact, Mr. Speaker, even as we speak, there are cases there about the failure of the systems that they have got. For example, Mr. Speaker, in Florida in 2000, an electronic voting machine gave Al Gore a final count of negative 16,000 votes. Negative. There's an electronic voting system. So, Mr. Speaker, all we are saying is this. A system has got flaws. It is not born. It is made. And therefore, let us not lie to the nation. Let us not tell this country that there are people who want to go back to a manual system when we have already got an electronic system. Mr. Speaker, we have proposed in this report some way forward on this matter. And Mr. Speaker, Article 83(3) is very clear that you cannot deny of the Constitution. You cannot deny a voter the right to vote. You cannot deny a voter. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, if at all an electronic process were to fail, and you deny a voter the right to fail, you'd be acting against the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, there are those who have said that this particular clause is a clause that is supposed to create chaos. On the basis of Article 83(3), you will realize, Mr. Speaker, that as a matter of fact, without this clause, there would be chaos. This clause is to prevent chaos, not to cause chaos. And I plead with my brothers and sisters on the other side that let us not use a system where we want to bully, we want to intimidate by way of streets or otherwise, that we are going to change a good law, we create a bad law, or we do not change a bad law on grounds that we are going to have chaos in our nation. Kenyans must get used to the idea that there will be times when we will agree, and there will be times when we will disagree. And when we disagree, we will disagree democratically. We will come to this house. We will debate. And when we debate, as is common practice in democracy, we will vote. And when we take a vote, we will take a vote on the basis of the Constitution of Kenya. That even though some people might win an argument today, it doesn't follow that they will win an argument tomorrow. And we cannot, Mr. Speaker, resort to the situation where every time we lose a vote, we then go to the streets to intimidate, to bully the government or otherwise, or even opposition, into accepting the views that we held. That is not democracy, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what we want to make sure is that in the regulations that we are going to publish, in the regulations made for this election, that the regulations are so tight, that they are so consultative in nature, that we have got the views of all political parties, so that, Mr. Speaker, whatever we fall back on, if an electronic system fails, does not bring back the dead into life. We do not hear of any dead people voting, but, Mr. Speaker, we also don't want to have live people who are going to be killed by a system that we have not addressed ourselves to. Mr. Speaker, I therefore seek from my friends across the floor, I seek from you understanding and being honest with ourselves and being honest with the people who sent us to this house. Let us look at it and say, just in the spirit that we had in the committee, we listened to people out there, we told them that we have heard them. Not everybody's view was going to be accepted, and indeed, not everybody's view in this house is going to be accepted. There is a way forward in this matter. We can agree in the regulations. We can negotiate. Ghana, which has been given as a perfect example of how people voted, has got a system. There is a trigger mechanism that says in the event that it has to go to a manual system, this must happen. We must, for example, have observers there. A person must first be put aside. They must be put aside. They must be scrutinized by all parties concerned. All parties must agree that this person is a legitimate individual and allowed to vote by all parties. Not just some guy standing somewhere in a polling station calling himself a returning officer. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, all is not lost. This law should pass as is. We should then go back, look at the regulations very seriously, very critically, and agree on regulations that ensure free and fair elections. Mr. Speaker, I beg to support.
Senator Ongera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity so that I rise to oppose this report. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I'm rising to oppose it because majority of Kenyans are opposing this report. Mr. Speaker, there were over 54 Kenyans who represented Kenyans' views in the just concluded report of the committee, and out of this, majority of them, Mr. Speaker, opposed these amendments. And Mr. Speaker, we as legislators, and I want to appeal to my colleagues across the floor, what has happened to the mic? We as legislators, Mr. Speaker, we are here to make good laws. We are not here, Mr. Speaker, to make laws that will just be at the behest of a fear-driven government. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the Jubilee government has lost it. They know that they are losing it, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, they want to oppose and remove these amendments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you know that somebody has lost something and is driven by fear, that is when you act in the manner in which these people are acting, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, why would we, after having the Kiraitu and Orengo Select Committee, we agreed on a consensus. We decided that we'll make good law for Kenya. We said, Mr. Speaker, let us have a voter registration, identification, and a transmission system, a system, Mr. Speaker, that is credible and transparent. Why then, Mr. Speaker, do we now come back and say, let us amend? What is the hurry, Mr. Speaker? I tend to agree, Mr. Speaker, with what Senator Nyong'o said. And Mr. Speaker, we need to correct that is not the MP for Kisumu Rural, but the distinguished senator for Kisumu. I tend to agree with what he said, Mr. Speaker. He said that he heard somewhere in the grapevine that maybe some lawyers went to see the president, and on the behest of these lawyers, who are, by the way, driven by fear, decided to change and bring these amendments. Mr. Speaker, we are setting up this country on a dangerous coalition path.
Senator Murkomen?
The Speaker, this House, as you know, the standing order is very clear, does not operate on conjecture, on imaginations, on figment of any person's imagination. Mr. Speaker, did you hear Senator Janet Ongera say that there are some lawyers who went to see the president? That Mr. Speaker, can she, Mr. Speaker, substantiate? Because there is a proper linking of the name of the president to it, and substantiate it, Mr. Speaker. Second, Mr. Speaker, why is a member of parliament whose responsibility is to do legislation and to amend law at any time, to even pass and initiate a legislation at time, trying to drag in the names of people who don't sit in this House and don't make law? Mr. Speaker, does Senator Ongera know that she plays also a complementary role in this House?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems that the distinguished senator of Elgeyo Marakwet did not understand the word English. The word I used, Mr. Speaker, I said maybe, and I tend to agree that what Senator Nyong'o said, he heard somewhere in the grapevine, Mr. Speaker. I was alluding and saying, Mr. Speaker, I did not say that I saw it categorically. Mr. Speaker, these amendments, Mr. Speaker...
What is it, Naisula?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to ask whether distinguished Senator Ongera is in order to continuously mislead this House. And it is a narrative that is continuing to say that we rely on what we have heard out there. If we cannot rely on the media, how can we rely on grapevine, which you have heard anyone discussing anywhere, and we state it here almost sounding like a fact? This is a House of record and facts, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder whether
What's your point of order, Senator Mudama?
Mr. Speaker, is the senators here really in order to continue accusing Senator Ongera on the remarks that were made by Anyang' Nyong'o, and they did not question Anyang' Nyong'o, Mr. Speaker? Are they in order? Are they in order?
Order, Senator Mudama, you have made it even worse. That's my challenge from the very beginning. And Senator Professor Nyong'o defended himself so well, because he said, I have not attributed any particular one, that because it is this kind of things that create an environment that such must thrive. That's how he acquitted himself, unless you had stepped out, Senator Mudama. Senator Ongera, I will encourage you not to tread on very slippery grounds. Stick to the bare minimum and you'll be safe.
Mr. Speaker, I stand guided. However, Mr. Speaker, I was merely quoting what Senator Nyong'o had said. Mr. Speaker, these amendments are setting this country on a coalition path, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, categorically and without fear, that Kenyans citizens of this country have Mr. Speaker, I want to state categorically that Kenyans and who are citizens of this country have reached a critical mass. And Mr. Speaker, they will never fear to even go to the streets, to even go to the forest of this country, because they have had enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. They are ready, Mr. Speaker, to fight for their democratic rights, because, Mr. Speaker, these are inalienable rights.
Mr. Speaker, did you hear the distinguished Senator Ongera, saying that these amendments are setting this country on a coalition path? Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, while the talk has been very rife, Mr. Speaker, that what this side is looking for is to cause mayhem, chaos in the country so that they can get the popular Nusumukate thing. You know, and order, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
order, Senator, order, Senator Boni Kalwale, order, senators. I am impressed with their level of sophistication, and they decided to interrogate each and every English word. In the process, inviting trouble to yourselves. Order, Senator Boni Kalwale. For you, Senator Kimani Paul Omatangi, there is nothing in the normal usage of the English language, a language that I read and read well, that stating that something is putting you on a collision path is just a statement on a coalition path. Order. I had a coalition, Senator Watagi had a coalition. There is no coalition path. There is only a coalition. But the short of it, order members, but the short of it, Senator Omatagi himself, order members, I think it is important to listen to your own contributions as well. Senator Omatagi himself made the same assertions. You made the same assertions. So, just because now they are coming from another member, they have taken a dangerous trend. I determine that that's a very innocent expression. Senator Janet Ongera should proceed. Order uninterrupted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that wise decision. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, is that Kenyans have achieved critical mass. They are now enlightened, and for sure, Mr. Speaker, they will not hesitate not to fight for their democratic rights, because these are inalienable rights, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you cannot make law in anticipation of a happening by saying, Mr. Speaker, we fear, we think there is a phobia, we think that this system will fail, therefore let us anticipate for the worst. Mr. Speaker, you make laws that can stand the test of time. You make laws that can improve this country. Mr. Speaker, by refusing for us not to have an electronic system, we are going 1,000 steps back. We know, Mr. Speaker, that this country for a long time has had electoral malpractices, which, Mr. Speaker, have been emanating from a manual system. And it is because of that, in the wisdom of the Kiraitu and the Rengo Select Committee, they decided to ensure that we had a voter identification, registration, and transmission system that can stand the test of time. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by telling my colleagues from this other side that, Mr. Speaker, as the late Mwangale said, even though you refuse to listen, even if you refuse to listen, even though you refuse to listen, you have heard me. Thank you.
Senator Sang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was a member of this particular joint committee that sat on these regulations, on this proposed amendment. And Mr. Speaker, I want to echo the sentiments of a number of my colleagues who sat in the same committee. But Mr. Speaker, interesting enough, when members of the public appeared before us, Mr. Speaker, we had a lot of discussions and a lot of presentations as to the kind of backup, Mr. Speaker, that is required. Mr. Speaker, I want to be on record indicating that at no point did we have a person appearing or a group appearing before us and saying, Mr. Speaker, that we do not need a backup. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is important that whereas we might disagree, but let us agree on issues that, bring us together, Mr. Speaker. Let us agree on the presentations that were brought together. Then we can agree to disagree, Mr. Speaker, on certain areas. So, Mr. Speaker, no member of the public appearing before our committee said that there is no need for backup. And, Mr. Speaker, we are living in this country, and we know, Mr. Speaker, that for every process, for every procedure, you must provide for backup, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all of us here have gadgets, we have phones, we have computers. Mr. Speaker, the element of backup is important. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the right to vote as provided for under the Constitution of Kenya is a right, Mr. Speaker, that is available to every Kenyan. Mr. Speaker, it would be tragic and completely unconstitutional if a member or a citizen in this country entitled by the Constitution to vote, Mr. Speaker, and that person is denied the right to vote, Mr. Speaker, because an act of parliament says, Mr. Speaker, that identification of that person must be electronic, and the gadget fails to identify them, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is important, Mr. Speaker, that as a House, when we make laws, when we amend the legislation, whether by the Kraitu Orengo Committee, Mr. Speaker, or this particular amendment, it must be a law that furthers the implementation of the Constitution and allowing every Kenyan the right to vote. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution of Kenya clearly indicates that for you to win the presidency in this country, for you to win the presidency, you must have 50 plus 1. Mr. Speaker, that particular plus 1 could as well be lost, Mr. Speaker, if an individual entitled to vote appears in a polling station and the machine, Mr. Speaker, the biometric voter identification is unable to function, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, as leaders in this House, I would want to persuade us, Mr. Speaker, that we need to look at this as politicians still. If you are running against your competitor, and tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, one of your supporters is unable to vote, Mr. Speaker, on the basis that he is unable to be identified because the machine failed, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, you end up potentially losing your seat, Mr. Speaker, just because of one vote. If we can agree, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the value of one vote, that everybody in this country has a right to vote, and that vote is equal, Mr. Speaker, we must be able to provide for a law that protects that law, that right, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the wordings of the law, and we spent some bit of time in the committee, within the legal committee, all of us are lawyers, Mr. Speaker. Even within the ICT committee, the understanding and the readings, Mr. Speaker, sometimes are on plain English. If you look at subsection, the proposed amendment 44A, Mr. Speaker, it talks about a complementary. Mr. Speaker, there is no stretch of imagination that you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, that the word complementary means the primary. Mr. Speaker, complementary can only be subject to, it can only be subsequent to a primary mechanism. Mr. Speaker, the mistake that has been sent across this country, Mr. Speaker, is that, Mr. Speaker...
Senator Mukite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'm surprised the senator from the Jubilee side...
Oh, the senator, your point of order, not your surprises.
I want to inform him that the word complementary has been raised by the public during the public participation. The issue is it is not well defined, and you should be telling us what is this complementary mechanisms you are referring to. If it's not manual, then what is it? Thank you.
Order, Senator. That's a point of argument.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the senators, Senator Mukite, will have our opportunity to share our understanding of the word complementary. But, Mr. Speaker, I am giving the definition that the definition of complementary, Mr. Speaker, anticipates that there is a primary. And the primary in this case, Mr. Speaker, the primary mechanism of identification as captured under Section 44 is electronic. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we are not only talking about a complementary mechanism. And, Mr. Speaker, the drafters of this amendment would have chosen, Mr. Speaker, to draft that particular amendment by being too prescriptive and telling us that the complementary mechanism would be manual backup or will be electronic backup, Mr. Speaker. And I see the wisdom in leaving it open so that the IEBC, who are the implementers of this legislation, Mr. Speaker, will be able to define, will be able to give it to us, and through regulations, Mr. Speaker. And if you look at regulations, Mr. Speaker, and I think this is important, that as members of Parliament, when we sit to make law, it is also important that we consider and give latitude to the implementers of the same legislation, Mr. Speaker. We can be too prescriptive. In terms of making legislation, Mr. Speaker, as members of Parliament, we theorize. It is a theory on our side, but we need to listen to the implementers. Mr. Speaker, we give, in this law, you are giving the implementers the little bit of latitude for them, Mr. Speaker, to look at the system that they have. Look at the electronic. Look at the experience that we have had as in this country. Mr. Speaker, it will not be lost on us that in 2013, Mr. Speaker, most of the biometric voter identification machines, Mr. Speaker, did not work. And therefore, if we were to, Mr. Speaker, if you were to appear in a polling station and the machine does not work, and Mr. Speaker, you have no fallback position, then you will disenfranchise this country. And Mr. Speaker, there is even a potentially constitutional crisis, Mr. Speaker, that if a member, and I am aware of these discussions within the committee, that the law allows IEBC to postpone the elections just to allow the machines and some of these things to be addressed. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution clearly indicates that the election in this country will be held on a particular date. If, Mr. Speaker, somebody appears in a polling station at 5 o'clock in the evening and the machine does not work and he is told to wait until, past midnight, that means already, Mr. Speaker, that will not be an election day. You are going into another day that is not provided for by the law. So, Mr. Speaker, it is important for this Senate and for Parliament, Mr. Speaker, to address itself to this issue. And, Mr. Speaker, the concerns that have been raised, if you look at Article 109 of the Constitution, not Constitution, but the Elections Act. Mr. Speaker, 109 subsection 1, and I want to quote this, Mr. Speaker. Article 1 section 109, subsection 1M. It provides that, Mr. Speaker, that the IEBC will make regulations to provide for the manner in which and the person by whom any question on the identity of any person claiming the right to vote shall be determined. In other words, Mr. Speaker, regulations to operationalize the proposed section 44A has already been anticipated within the section on regulations. That Mr. Speaker, you must, Mr. Speaker, and Professor Nyong'o, my good friend and neighbor, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my Professor Nyong'o, and I will answer the same, the anticipated point of order. You cannot make regulations pursuant to, you only make regulations pursuant to an act or to our provisions within the law. They could not be able to make regulations pursuant to article, to the section on backup before you provide for it, Professor. So the amendment is to provide for the law pursuant to which regulations can be made. And I think this, Professor Nyong'o, this is an area that you may need to take some bit of time to read, Professor. So very well. So, Mr. Speaker, finally, Mr. Speaker, the misinformation that has gone to the public. And we are, as members of parliament, as leaders in this country, we must be able to be responsible in the kind of information that we pass around, Mr. Speaker. So that, Mr. Speaker, we do not create myths. I have seen members in this House, Mr. Speaker, share some, information that is rumors picked from wherever, Mr. Speaker, people pick them from. And, Mr. Speaker, if we were to engage along those lines, we are now discussing globally, Mr. Speaker, the just concluded elections in the U.S. And, Mr. Speaker, we have had, there have been discussions as to how foreign countries, Mr. Speaker, have been, mentioned to have interfered with the electronic elections in the U.S., Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that politicians in this country, some of them are very close allies to some of these powers out there, Mr. Speaker. If we were to continue with that narrative, Mr. Speaker, we would be questioning the obsession by certain leaders in this country for an purely electronic process, Mr. Speaker, as to whether they already have discussions with some of these powers to come and interfere with the elections, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, some of these ridiculous,
Mr. Speaker, did you hear the Honorable Senator making a very, very extreme statement that even as we debate a very important bill, that some of these leaders on this side are very close to some powers out which we don't know? Is it in order to incest this country even further? Because this electronic voter transmission was actually an idea of the Jubilee administration. What we did was just to say yes to what you already initiated. Is it in order to further confuse and mislead this country?
And Mr. Speaker, what of course, Mr. Speaker, in response to that, I didn't mention anybody. Of course, every one of us, Mr. Speaker, knows Senator Elizabeth Masha Ongoro is a close friend to a particular politician, and therefore, most likely, Mr. Speaker, when I mentioned this, she is able to identify herself. However, Mr. Speaker,
order, members, order. Senator, what is
the guilty are always afraid, Mr. Speaker.
May I stand here and proudly state that not only am I close to that particular politician you are trying to insinuate, I believe he's the best leader for this country, and I have no apologies to make. And Mr. Speaker, may I tell Senator Sang that it is my right, I have the freedom of association, and he's still in order to offload this electronic voter whatever on us when it was actually a child of the Jubilee administration which we are just trying to adopt. Is it in order?
Mr. Speaker, order. Assuming, Mr. Speaker, that what Elizabeth is saying, that electronic was Jubilee and the manual was theirs, what is the problem in providing for a manual of what they believed in the first place? They should not have a problem with this particular one, Mr. Speaker. So what is it, they should be excited that we are buying into the manual that they believed in the first place.
Order, senators, order.
Mr. Speaker, are we in order to mislead Kenyans that these electronic BVRs we are talking about are starting now? Yet, even in the Select Committee, we ensured we returned the process that we did in 2013. So I don't know which electronics we are now talking about, yet we just know we are still in the process when the former Prime Minister indeed gave us that process. Are we now in order to tell Kenyans we have changed the system? We haven't. We are still on the same, and we are going to do the same way we did in 2013. The same gadget we used is the same.
In conclusion,
proceed, senators.
In conclusion, Mr. Speaker.
Order, senators, order.
Allow me to conclude, Mr. Speaker.
Order, members. Order, Senator Ongoro. I don't know what's exciting you. You are alleging allegiance to a personality that is yet to be identified. That's not how we pledge loyalty in this country. Conclude, Senator Sir. Order, Senator Ongoro. I have not given you the floor. Order. Order, Senator Ongoro.
Elections are emotive issues, Mr. Speaker, and this is clearly why, Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to provide for complementary mechanisms, Mr. Speaker, because if somebody was to be told, can you wait for 2 hours because you cannot be able to vote, you can imagine how volatile that would be if somebody can be volatile to this extent if we are only discussing about a law, Mr. Speaker. That is why every Kenyan, Mr. Speaker, must be provided with an opportunity to vote within good time, Mr. Speaker, so that this country and the stability of this country can be secured. Mr. Speaker, finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask my colleagues on both sides that the Senate has won the admiration of all Kenyans on the basis, Mr. Speaker, of how we have conducted ourselves. Mr. Speaker, if we turn the chamber into one of the cardinal principles in a democracy, Mr. Speaker, is that, Mr. Speaker, you will vote, you will accept the outcome of a vote, Mr. Speaker, because that is democracy. If we believe if we want to take this country forward, we must believe, Mr. Speaker, that the outcome of a democratic process, like the one that we did within the committee, like the one that we have engaged here, Mr. Speaker, should be given,
your time is up,
followed, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Orengo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to be as brief as possible, although 10 minutes is not good enough, but I want to say this. I'm pleased with both sides of the House. The Constitution of Kenya is very clear on who exercises the authority of legislation in the Republic of Kenya. It is through the directly elected representatives of the people, which include even nominated members. That power is delegated to the people of Kenya to us directly. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very worried about this bill that we're about to pass, because one of the things that is happening, which is included in the bill that came from the National Assembly, that we are ousting the jurisdiction of the Senate in matters that are very important, and we seem not really to care about it. On the question of delimitation of boundaries, the Constitution is very clear. You cannot ignore the Senate. Now, through this bill, it looks quite clearly.
Senator Murkomen.
The Speaker, is Senator Orengo in order? The Speaker, to mislead this House, and particularly the country, that the Senate has a role in delimitation of electoral units. When, Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is sanctity and clear in Article 89 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, which makes it so clear that it is only the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission that has a responsibility of dealing with boundaries. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it says in 89.8 that if once the Commission has gazetted, that is 9, once the Commission has gazetted the electoral units, Mr. Speaker, any person who is aggrieved cannot go to Parliament, doesn't require approval of any House of Parliament, but, Mr. Speaker, you can take that issue in Article Subsequent 10 to High Court. So, Mr. Speaker, it is totally misleading for Senator Orengo to try to allocate National Assembly or to allocate the Senate a responsibility that the Constitution, so clear in Article 89, is only in the jurisdiction of Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission.
A senator for Elgeyo Marakwet, and that's why there are so many sieges in Elgeyo Marakwet, because people don't listen. I don't know whether it's Siege or because people do not listen to each other. But at least in this Senate, I think we listen to each other. Now, I was not speaking in terms of what is in the Constitution. I'm talking in terms of what is in this bill. That when it comes to provisions that relate to even reporting on account of reports which have been made by the Electoral Commission, it goes only to the National Assembly. It does not come to Parliament. It doesn't come to the Senate. And that is very clear. I think I just want to take my time. Mr. Speaker.
What is this, Senator Murkomen?
Mr. Speaker, I sympathize with my, as I've always said, my mentor and senior counsel. Because, Mr. Speaker, it looks like he was speaking in his mouth, but his ears were not listening to himself. So, Speaker, the senior counsel had said, Senator Orengo, that Senate is being excluded on matters of delimitation of electoral units. Mr. Speaker, wait. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my turn. It's my turn, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my turn.
Order, members, order.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. Order, members, this is a very important area.
Yeah.
So we'll hear Senator Murkomen. Yeah. I will still give the members who want to contradict him.
Yes.
Because I am not so sure, Senator Murkomen, if you really want to push that argument very far.
I am. It is important. Mr. Speaker,
But the floor is yours. Try your best.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I do not refuse the argument that Senator Orengo is saying that the bill from National Assembly says that on delimitation of boundaries, National Assembly to approve. But Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is clear. National Assembly, neither National Assembly nor the Senate, Mr. Speaker, has a role in approval of electoral units. And my argument here, Mr. Speaker, is that the senior counsel is wrong in law, is wrong in the Constitution, is wrong in the argument, Mr. Speaker, to try to say, since National Assembly is trying to abrogate itself unconstitutionally on a responsibility that is not given to them by the Constitution, that we should preside over our House in the Senate and also abrogate ourselves such a responsibility, which is unconstitutional. And that's why I read Article 89 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker.
Order, members. I will, on the assumption that Senator Sang may augment Senator Murkomen's argument, I'll give him first. And on the other assumption that Senator Kilosa Jr. may wish to contradict it, I'll give him next. Proceed, Senator Sam.
Mr. Speaker, I want to agree that what Senator Orengo is saying is that there is a provision within the proposed law that tries to give National Assembly the power, some role in the limitation of boundaries. And Mr. Speaker, that proposed law is unconstitutional on the basis of Article 89. And if you look at just one article, Mr. Speaker. Just one article.
Order, Senator Sam. Order, members.
Just one article.
Order, members. Order, members. You know, when I call out for order, I am only interrupting you. I am not stopping you from contributing thereafter. So let's be very clear. Because I think Senator Sang has actually gotten the crux of the matter. And my concern, there must have been an admission by Senator Murkomen in the first instance. Because even when Senator Orengo tried to tell him it is not the Constitution, it is this bill which Senator Sang has agreed to. We just need to be fair to each other. That's all we are asking. Order, Senator Murkomen. Proceed, Senator Sang.
And Mr. Speaker, if you look at the Article 2, subsection 4, which I am sure Senator Orengo is well versed with, and he has quoted it in this House severally, on the supremacy of the Constitution, it clearly says that any law, including the proposed electoral amendment bill that we are discussing, any law that, including customary law, that is inconsistent with this Constitution is void to the extent of inconsistency, and any act or omission in contravention of this Constitution is invalid. To the extent that, Mr. Speaker, we don't need to flog a dead horse. This is already a dead horse, that particular provision. We don't need to deal with it. By operation of the Constitution is there.
Members, Other members, you do not deny a member an opportunity to contribute just because of your own understanding of the same. Senator Orengo will contribute, but I'd allow Senator Kilonzo just to make a brief intervention. We'll hold your time, Senator Orengo.
Mr. Speaker, in Article 260, the Constitution says we must read it in a way that breathes life into it. It must make sense. And allow me to educate Senator Murkomen a bit. Mr. Speaker, there is a special reason why this bill... Why don't you wait? I'm going to educate you.
Order, Senator. You cannot challenge that after you determine whether it
you have been educated enough, yeah.
For now, it's just a word.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, the reason this bill is here is pursuant to Article 110(2), which says, and it makes this a special bill because it relates to election of members of county assemblies or county executive. Senator Murkomen, those words that are stated in clause 32 are words of elected members, and that is our jurisdiction. That's number one. Number two, this Senate, through myself, has published a bill on county boundaries. Those words exist in counties. Article 188. Mr. Speaker, that is our jurisdiction. But what is even worse, Mr. Speaker, is that if the National Assembly has abrogated itself and given itself a jurisdiction that does not exist and is as unconstitutional, Senator Sang and Senator Murkomen have abdicated their responsibilities as senators by voting yes to it, Mr. Speaker. What are you talking about? Allow me to educate these young men, Mr. Speaker. Because Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, Governor Murutu mentioned something that is very important. And he said there are wards that border counties. And therefore, it is possible that in a delimitation of a ward, you will affect the boundary of a county. This gentleman and a good senator from Elgeyo-Marakwet County needs to read this thing backwards and forwards. That's why it's a culture. And conjunctively, not selectively, Mr. Speaker, and that is the end of my education to Senator Murkomen.
Order, members. Order, members. We need to make progress. But I will allow Senator Murkomen to confirm whether he has been educated or otherwise.
Mr. Speaker, it is a pity that my colleague has miseducated the public. And by the way, either by qualification or otherwise, Mr. Speaker, Senator Mutula Kilonzo is not qualified to educate me. But Mr. Speaker, and he has actually confirmed from his submissions. Mr. Speaker, let's get it right. Let's get it right. Neither Senate nor National Assembly has a responsibility on delimitation of boundaries. Mr. Speaker, the County Government Act, which I helped to draft, Mr. Speaker, makes it very clear that the Senate can play a role, say, for example, to say we need 1,450 wards like we proposed then and passed by Parliament. But we have no role to go and say that ward should be like this or like this. The Constitution removed that responsibility from National Assembly or the Senate. And Mr. Speaker, my correction to Senator Orengo was specific. Mr. Speaker, not just running around the question of whether a bill concerns counties, whether Article 188, what Article 188 that Mutula Kilonzo Jr. is talking about, insofar as the delimitation of counties, which the Constitution says we must pass in the Senate National Assembly by 2/3. That is specific. But the Constitution, Article 89, does not give us roles to deal with delimitation of wards and constituencies, whether this House or National Assembly. That is the Constitution, that is the law. It cannot be changed by rhetoric and repetitions.
Order, members. Order, members. Order, members. Order, members. Obviously, it was never meant to be, and it shall not be that the chamber or a House of Parliament or Parliament shall be a classroom for educating people. Proceed, Senator Orengo.
Mr. Speaker, let me, normally when a senior counsel is speaking, so occasionally a junior counsel is allowed to educate another junior counsel. But, so I'm grateful to both my junior, Mr. Sang, and my junior, Mutula Kilonzo. And by the way, Mr. Mutula Kilonzo, if you go to the law reports, you will find his name there. I'm still waiting to see a reported case with Senator Murkomen's name. But let me, but I know Senator Kembe Gitura, you'll find his name there. Mr. Speaker,
what is it, Senator Murkomen, on that particular one?
Mr. Speaker,
specific.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, senators, order, senators, order, Senator Murkomen. Order, my difficulty is if a member has been mentioned, he has a right of reply. And if Senator Kaniri and I have yet to be registered, we just have to live with the reality.
So, Mr. Speaker, we were not talking about litigation. And I am sure my colleague may have been reported in a case he did, either in High Court or in some magistrate court. That is possible. But, Mr. Speaker, it must also be on record. I need to respond to the specific issue.
Was specific.
Yeah, that's what I'm responding to.
I thought you had reported.
Mr. Speaker, I have been cited in refereed journals, Mr. Speaker, including books, Mr. Speaker, that speak about the role of the Senate in this republic. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to education, and I have taught in university where my colleagues took members, including my senior counsel.
Order members. Order members. Order members. Order, Senator Bello. Order members. Order members. I'll direct as follows. Senator Murkomen did not really have to make that intervention. And sometimes you must appreciate there will be an opportunity to demonstrate how many other things you have done besides where you are supposed to have been. That's okay. So let's allow Senator Orengo to proceed.
Mr. Speaker, but I cannot deny that he has engaged in a lot of extracurricular activities which are on record. Now, Mr. Speaker, if I
proceed, Senator Orengo.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, let me just get to the point. And the point is this, and which has not been answered from many of the interventions. But the point that I want to make about Section 44, which is the one which has brought a lot of contention, is that, Mr. Speaker, there are three words in those particular provisions. And I think this is important because if you address it clearly and directly, it may let the country know what we are talking about. There are three words. The word notwithstanding, the word complementary, and the word commission. Under these provisions, the clause that we are talking about, the discretion to determine how somebody who cannot be identified electronically can be identified for purposes of voting, that discretion is not in the rules. It is given to the commission because it says the commission shall put in place a complementary mechanism. It is the commission. It's not through regulations. And Mr. Speaker, if you remember, there was a time when DCs were given discretion to decide when they were returning officers, and there was a lot of messes in the election process. I know that in Trans Nzoia, for example, where my friend, the late Muliro, won an election, And then a returning officer was a DC, told him that he had the one who had lost, and therefore he was free to go to the High Court for purposes of determination. This is so important that we cannot leave it to the Commission. It is a matter that is so important that it is this Senate and the National Assembly that must decide how we elect leaders who become either the Speaker or become the leader of minority or the leader of minority. It is not a function that we can give to the Commission. And if you give it to the Commission also, why are you giving the Commission law-making powers? You are telling them to manage elections and also to make rules about how they conduct those elections. If you are in court today, Senator Murkomen, a lot of judges are complaining that you are the ones who make the law. Now, if you fail to make the law definitive and predictable, who is going to save you from laws that have lacunas and to give a lot of people discretion, which they should not be having? Mr. Speaker, because our time is short, I want to see this without contradiction. In this Parliament, historically, is the laws that were made in this House that members of Parliament themselves have found suffering, tribulation, because we are passing laws quickly without thinking. I remember when Section 2A was being passed, I was the only person who rose in that Parliament. We were brought back to the House in this kind of circumstances. And only President Moi and President Kibaki moved, seconded, and we were told no more debate. If you go to the record, I was the only one who spoke. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this. The person that you think is your neighbor will be your enemy tomorrow. I want to say this in this Senate. When I was in danger, it was this Senator Gigi Kariku who saved me. When somebody wanted to detain me, in fact, it was a minister who told me tomorrow you're going to be detained. It is Gigi Kariku who told me, don't take those words for fun. Run, you're going to be chewed. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are not listening to each other. I beg you, let us listen to each other. This is one country, this is one Kenya. And I cannot understand circumstances in which the two joint houses of Parliament pass a law which is agreed, which is celebrated, and even the faith communities give a contribution, and then at the end of the day, after hardly 60 days, we say there was a mistake. Can you be trusted? Even if a marriage that you enter in a church, and after 3 months you say, we cannot live together, something is wrong with you. You need a doctor. And the person who brought this bill to us in this Senate, that person needs a doctor, whoever it is. We can't be seen to be changing our mind like little, I don't know, even animals have memory, but it looks like we don't have memory of what we have done. Mr. Speaker, I plead that this bill, if you pass it the way it is, this House, we are calling ourselves the superior house, the superior chamber, and yet we are not even prepared to change a comma from the National Assembly. You are just becoming a conveyor belt. In fact, the President Uhuru, I can say that he's doing better than us. Some laws have gone to him and he has brought them back because he's unhappy with what Parliament has done. Now, hapa sisi, we don't see anything wrong. Mr. Speaker, if you look at one of the provisions of this, if you look at this bill, part of the proposed amendments are amendments to laws that do not exist. Surely, what are we doing? And we have passed it. And the law is non-existent. We are dealt with. And then, Mr. Speaker, Article 99, or rather Article 95 of the Constitution say that Parliament shall carry out its function in accordance with the Constitution. I am very happy with Mr. Sang. I'll forever call you my learned friend, not to your neighbor who is next to you, because you need to be candid. When Parliament is dealing with something which is clearly unconstitutional, we should say so. We should not let it pass. But if it passes, even the courts are going to say, was Wolcomen there, was Sang there, was Kilonzo there, was the Attorney General Emeritus, was he there? Was the Speaker there, who is a legal student, was he there? So I urge you that this bill is only for rejection. And in conclusion, I want to talk to my sister Nyaugenya, Honorable Beth Mugo. We have gone through the trenches with you. You know when governments are in power, how they behave. I think probably you can give people on the other side a little education. That sometimes revolutions eat their own children. Yes. Government eats their own people. This government is going to punish you more than they will punish me. I'm telling you, in another 1 year, you will be crying in my office to come and represent you. I know, I can tell you. I've appeared for President Kibaki when he was in the opposition about laws which were made here. I've appeared for President Uhuru and Vice President Ruto when Kanu was going away. When Kibaki was taking away his members and making them ministers, I went to court on their behalf. But now that they're in power, they are forgetting. And power, when power gets into your head, I can tell you, you will never remember that one day there's a bigger power, Almighty, that will deal with you. That will deal. Mr. Speaker, I just want to finish in appreciating what you did. If you are any other Kenyan who is not patriotic, we will not have a time to debate. Yes. This thing will not have gone to public participation. Yes. But in your wisdom, you gave us opportunity, and for that I thank you, and I shall forever be grateful. But if Kiraitu votes for this bill, I will remember forever that the struggle you carried out in the streets were for nothing.
Senator Kembi Gitura. What's your point of order, Senator Kiraitu?
Mr. Speaker, sir, I think the Privileges Act gives a member of parliament absolute freedom to vote in any manner that his conscience dictates. Is it in order for senior counsel, the oldest serving member of parliament on that side, to come and try to interfere with a member's freedom to vote in a manner that
works? Order members, Senator Kembi has the floor, but for purposes of Senator Kiraitu Murungi, I don't think Senator Orengo is quite alive that you have real capacity and you cannot be intimidated. He was only reminding you of your history and that choices have consequences.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish to thank you for this opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, this is an extremely important bill that we are debating here. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by also thanking you, like Senator Orengo, and thanking the House for having given this House the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, not just to have public participation, but also to have two joint committees of this House sitting together and considering this very important issue. Mr. Speaker, right from the outset, let me start by saying, because I am a member of the Legal Affairs Committee, that in our public hearings, we listened to 54 oral submissions, including memoranda that were given to us, Mr. Speaker. And we listened to these memoranda very, very carefully and very faithfully. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, the very last person to give his memorandum oral presentation on this matter was no less than the distinguished Senator for Siaya, Senator James Orengo. He was the very last person to give his words on the public participation. And I'm going to quote to some length about what he said at the public participation. But let me from the outset, Mr. Speaker, start by referring to the Constitution itself at Article 86. Article 86, Mr. Speaker, is the root law for voting. And it says at Article 86, Mr. Speaker, that at every election, the IEBC shall ensure that whatever voting method is used, the system is simple, accurate, verifiable, secure, accountable, and transparent. Those are the key words in Article 86, Mr. Speaker. And then at B, and I think this is important so that we can disabuse the notion that we have an electronic voting system in Kenya, at Article 86B, it says that the votes cast are counted, tabulated, and the results announced promptly by the presiding officer at each polling station. And Mr. Speaker, I want to submit that those are extremely important words in the Constitution. At Article 44, Mr. Speaker, which is the real subject of this debate, and I'm only going to address myself to Section 44 and 44A as amended. Section 44 is very, very important, because if you have to read it against Article 86 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, then you see where we are coming from in dealing with Section 44A as proposed to be amended. Because Section 44(1) says that subject to this section, there is established an integrated electoral system which enables biometric voter registration, electronic voter identification, and electronic transmission of results. But B is very important, because B says that the Commission shall, for purposes of subsection 1, develop a policy on the progressive, and the words here are progressive, use of technology in the electoral process. So subsection 2 recognizes that we are not there yet, that we like to have a totally integrated electronic system, but we are not there yet. It is work in progress. But Mr. Speaker, a section that nobody seems to be referring to in this law is Section 44, subsection 7A, which says, and again I want to quote, that the technology used for purposes of the first general election, the technology used for the purposes of the first general election upon commencement of this election section shall be restricted to the process of voter registration, identification of voters, and result transmission. So those are the only three things that we are expected to deal with in these coming elections. That is registration, identification, and transmission. Now, if we were to go by Section 44 only, Mr. Speaker, you will note that Section 44 has in place only technology voting. It does not give way, there is no window for voting other than using that registration, using that identification, and using that transmission. And Mr. Speaker, when we were in the public participation, we listened to very many, like I said, 54 people who gave evidence, who gave evidence or submissions before us. And all of them, the only person in the whole list of people who came before us was a gentleman who identified himself, I cannot remember his name now, but as the chairman or CEO of the Computer Society of Kenya. And he is the only person who purported to allege or to say that in the aeroplane industry there is a technology called SITA which doesn't fail. Those are the words he used, that SITA cannot fail, it has never failed. And when he was put to task by the bipartisan committee that sat here, he was not able to explain to us how the Malaysian aircraft disappeared and has never been traced to date, how accidents happen in the air, or how it can happen that there can be lack of communication from the air controller to an aeroplane. SITA may not fail, yes, but can the communication between point A and point B fail? He was the only person, but everybody else who came before us, Mr. Speaker, took the view that, yes, technology does fail. Senator Orengo, a gentleman for whom I have the greatest respect, Mr. Speaker, started his submissions by using these words, and I quote, he said, we must embrace technology. And I agree with him 100% that we must embrace technology. And that is the reason, Mr. Speaker, there is section 44(1), subsection 1 and subsection 2, which talk about progressive embracing of technology, so that not in the first generation election after the passing of this law, but sometimes in the future, we shall be able to have a full electronic voting, Mr. Speaker. But even Senator Orengo did agree, Mr. Speaker. And like I say, I'm clear in my mind, because he was the last person to give evidence. He said that planes, and that was following up on the gentleman from the Computer Society of Kenya. He said, and I quote, that planes are safe most of the time. And the word is most of the time. It is that small gap of them failing sometime, however rarely, that we must take care of, that we must take into account, that we must consider when we are discussing a very serious issue called elections in this nation. And let us not tell Kenyans that there is a possibility of having chaos and riots and everything because of failure because of electronic or electoral or technology. Where we can have chaos, where we have had chaos in the past, Mr. Speaker, was not in the failure of the system. It was in the integrity of the voting system. And there lies the question, and there lies the issue which we must distinguish. What we are trying to work for, Mr. Speaker, is trying to attain the integrity or integrity of a voting system that is acceptable to everybody. And that, Mr. Speaker, takes us to Section 44A as proposed to be amended. Section 44A, Mr. Speaker, is clear in its wording. And I like very much myself, because I'm entitled to my view like everybody is entitled to their view, and I've said this at committee, and I'll say it here again, that I like the word complementary very much in Section 44A. In the first instance, Mr. Speaker, if we are left with Section 44 as currently existing, there will be absolutely no, I hope I'm getting 15 minutes, not 10 minutes. Because everybody was getting 15. Mr. Speaker, Section 44, the word complementary, Mr. Speaker, is a word that gives a discretion not to Parliament, not to anybody else, but to the Electoral Commission, which is an independent body. Mr. Speaker, it's an independent body, the IEBC, and if you look at Section 44, unlike what Senator James Orengo said, Mr. Speaker, Section 44 gives the Commission the power to make regulations, but in consultation with relevant agencies. Why can the IEBC not make regulations at a 44A in consultation with all other agencies, including the committees of Parliament, National Assembly, and Senate, Mr. Speaker, to make
regulations that are acceptable to all of us. If you accept, I had one governor here come, Mr. Speaker, come and try to ridicule people who may not be identifiable. And statistics show that if only 1% of Kenyans don't, if 10% of Kenyans don't vote because of a failure of any system, 2.5 million Kenyans will lose the right to vote. And 2.5 million Kenyans will make a lot of difference in the elections of this nation. If only 1% does not vote because of a failure, 250,000 Kenyans will not vote. Mr. Speaker, these are the issues that we must take into account, and that is why we must accept in good faith that we need to have a system other than total electronic, total technology. Nobody here, except the computer expert, who are able to disapprove, nobody say that we do not need a backup. And that backup, Mr. Speaker, in good faith is what we need to work on. We need to work on, all of us together, so that we have regulations that are watertight and which will ensure the integrity of a voting system that is acceptable to all of us in this country, Mr. Speaker. The case of Ghana has been quoted very many times. I want to remind everybody that what controlled the elections in Ghana is contained in the regulations, not in the substantive law. And we went through those regulations word for word at the committee, Mr. Speaker, the joint committee. And we saw that it is possible to make regulations under Section 44A, which will make our elections have such integrity that they are not going to be questioned, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only other thing I'd like to say as I conclude is this. The only other thing I'd like to say as I conclude is this, Mr. Speaker, that what we need to be looking for is how to create a system that makes our elections have integrity. And Mr. Speaker, like one or two other people said before me, we must work in such a way that we who have the power to legislate must appreciate, whether you call it numbers or what you want to call it, that the only way for a Senate, for a National Assembly, for a legislative body to make a decision is by having a debate like the one we are having, and then if need be, have a vote. And if a vote shows that the majority of the people voting after the debate need to have a backup that is acceptable to everybody, and the underlining word is acceptable, after serious scrutiny, then that must be the way to go. And we must, all of us, work towards this, because at the end of the day, all of us are Kenyans. We have only one country, and we must protect it from the mistrust that is being created, most of which is artificial, trying to make Kenyans want to believe that there is going to be a problem going forward, when indeed we have not had a problem, even when we did not have any electronic voting at all. And when we had problems in 2007, 2008, it had nothing to do with electronic voting, because